with a meditation on language. I was just last week, had my nose in a National Geo, when I came across this fantastic little article, which I'm sharing with you. It's a PDF that will come with this meditation, on the languages of New York. And New York is the most linguistically diverse city on the planet, and also almost certainly in history. It's got over 700 languages to be found within its borders. And that's an extraordinary, astonishing thing. And it's so suitable for thinking about global citizenship and the themes of History 140 that I thought, I've got to say something about this, because so much of the course is big picture. But, I keep saying we've got to go down to the local, to the micro, so that we can actually draw the threads between, let's say, big thinking of a David Christian or a Yuval Harari, and the realities of people on the ground. It's really important to understand that people live history, they live culture, they live their lives, and of course this is the water we swim in. Sometimes the water can be really turbulent. The politics in the US and across much of the planet, actually, the tensions around that, where people are struggling to make sense of and to hold on to identities that are under stress. Identity stress, I think, is a very common ingredient of modern life. It tends to make us tired and cranky, sometimes vindictive or even violent. That makes sense at one level, but it also it suggests that what we lack is perspective. Sense-making, history is a sense-making tool, one amongst a number, like futures thinking, which I do a lot of as well. But sense-making is important to understand the world as a process in which things are negotiated, struggled over, argued over. Think of the family arguing about something around the dinner table, if you have a dinner table anymore, not sitting in front of computers in your own little cells around the family home. But, that's what it's all about, is working things out and having the tools to discuss in ways that and negotiate and argue in ways that are not necessarily deeply personal and confrontational. We don't need the kind of levels of confrontation. Let's say Israel and Gaza, for instance, is a prime example of that. But the Ukraine and Russia is another really good example, and just the kind of divisive politics that the planet is facing all over the place. So I'm going to jump into this little meditation, and it really is triggered by this meditation on the languages of New York. And then I'm going to pull out a little bit to a book that I had my nose in 2 decades ago, fantastic book called The Empires of the Word. I'm going to talk about the work of Nicholas Ostler a little bit as well. Okay, so hang on and let's see what happens. So here we go. Let's jump to the PowerPoint. First thing to be said, there we go. First thing to be said about the PowerPoint is that it's got lots of images in it, nearly all of which have links. So when I upload the video, this meditation, you could say, you're going to have a PowerPoint coming with, just as you do with standard lectures. Make sure that if something's intriguing you, that the links, the images that I'm using, that you click on them and they will take you directly to the sites where I've extracted those images. Okay, so here we have a wonderful map from the languages of New York. It comes from a website that's run by the city of New York in conjunction with a guy called, I think, Ross Perlin. He's the guy who triggered, I guess, the National Geographic article that interested me so much. He's just produced a book, which we'll talk about shortly. So what we have is from the article, on the language of New York. It says, look, it gives us sort of a background on the language history of New York. Starts off with Lenape, which was the language of the indigenous people of the island. A little bit more on that shortly. But they get to the point of saying, well, in the 21st century, what's happening? New York City is hyper-diverse, with arrivals from areas of deep linguistic diversity across the globe, from the Himalayas to West Africa to the indigenous zones of Mexico and Central America. Among its residents, the city can count speakers of languages found virtually nowhere else, but the pressure to switch to rising world languages like English and Spanish, Mandarin, Arabic and Hindi is intense. And we will talk, and this is where Nicholas Ostler in the book I was waving around just a moment ago come in. We'll talk about that the way in which languages come to dominate spaces, you might say, dominate social forms and understanding. So there's the book by Ross Perlin. Okay, it looks like a terrific book. I have not got it yet, but it's on my hit list. So 700 plus languages. What can we say? Well, from a world history point of view, from the point of view of this course, the city acts as a melting pot. It is an incredibly dynamic economic, cultural, social, you could say epistemologically, in other words, learning space. Mapping languages is cool, and there's a link there to the language map that I drew that image from on the front slide. Okay, Endangered Language Alliance is a group of activists and academics working to not just map the languages of the planet, but also to maintain them through either recordings and so on, or actually through facilitating the revitalization of languages. Ross Perlin is one of the key players in that society or association. So what can we say? Well, there's a huge potential, of course, for collective learning. Languages are the way we learn, the way we communicate and share. And it's also the way it shapes or frames the way we understand the world. So it's a great example, or languages in general are a great example of complexity at work. And New York City is an incredibly useful way of understanding complexity. Okay, the result of both energy and inbound and outbound. In other words, people they're drawn into large cities. They're drawn in economically, they're drawn in socially, collectively. One person goes there and then they bring their family and so on. So there's inbound energy, and outbound energy is the energy that a city generates and exudes. But it's also outbound in the sense that cities leak energy. They are entropic, so entropy is real. And to quote, the remarkable linguistic convergence in New York and similar cities could vanish fast. That's a quote from the little PDF that I've put up for you from the National Geo. So we've got a window into thinking about the key themes of this course. So Perlin makes this point, that applying the lens of language helps us understand the city and all cities in profoundly new ways, from Frisian, which is from the north of Holland, and the Flemish, okay, same as well. They're very closely aligned languages 400 years ago, to Fujianese, Japanese of kind, and Fulani, I think that's African today. Deep linguistic diversity, although always overlooked, has been fundamental to civic identity, to city identity, to city-states in the ancient past, through to cities, let's say, like Singapore, which has legislated a four-language not a hierarchy, a four-language collaboration in education and so on, Malay and Hindi and English, of course, and the dominant one for Singapore, of course, is Han Chinese, because that was they led the break of Singapore from Malaysia in the 1960s. I was stretching my brain. No, actually late 50s, Lee Kuan Yew, who was a Han Chinese lawyer and activist who ended up becoming the president of Singapore. So what we have, though, is this window, as I keep saying, into what makes this work. So let's look at variety. Variety, I always say, is the spice of life. I love trying new things. I'm a total geek when it comes to new things. But you've got these languages: Seke from Nepal, Nahuatl from Mexico, which is from the Aztec, Wakhi from Tajikistan in Central Europe, Asia, Nko from Guinea, Yiddish from Central Europe, and Lenape, of course, I said I'd come back to it, which was the indigenous language of New York before it became New York. Manhattan means in Lenape, the place where we get bows, which I think is terrific. So what can we say about this in relation to our course, global citizenship? Language is a key to culture and identity. Diversity is healthy, both in ecological settings and in cultural settings. It feeds evolutionary creativity. Okay, that's to be understood, that we are part of processes, not a given, stable present, but actually a present alive to change. If we speak another language, we're really fortunate. Many of us don't, or only sort of understand language from the periphery. English makes us incredibly lazy because almost anywhere you go, you can speak to people in English, unless you go to the back blocks of India, which I've done on multiple occasions, when you have to find other ways of communicating. But, you know, I am mainly an English speaker, though I have understanding of Latin, a bit of Greek. I've been studying Swedish for 5 years because I keep going back there, and I figured it was about time that I should do Swedish. But, you know, I've got an old brain, and, you know, it takes a long time for this stuff to stick. But I thoroughly enjoy language. And the point, I think, is that if you're a monolingual person, like most Australians are, we need to develop other skills to appreciate diversity of language. Okay, not to be threatened by language, and also not to beat ourselves up for being unfortunately born in Australia, where we only have one language and really second-rate language teaching in most schools. Sorry if you're a high school teacher, but, you know, it doesn't really stick for most people. So what can we say? Third point, to be global is not to be homogenous. In other words, English domination, for instance, for us, or if you're a Han Chinese, you know, Mandarin is a dominant language. Yeah, Spanish is, you know, hugely influential. You know, Indian people, there are so many language groups in India, large language groups, but Hindi, it has become the lingua franca of India, overtaking English, which was the lingua franca for many years, and still many, well, I would say nearly all educated Indians speak English as well. But it's not homogenous. Homogeneity is, you know, is a death knell in many respects for cultural creativity, or at least cultural creativity has to find new ways of being creative. Maybe AI will do that for us. Final point, cities are creative, innovative spaces where energy, complexity, and collective learning are easily seen, as in the languages of New York, in the working of their peoples and their cultures. So here I've got a snippet from Nicholas Ostler's fabulous book, Empires of the Word. I didn't want to type the whole thing out, so I just actually photographed it and dropped it in. But, you know, I want to make this point. If we're thinking about language and language dispersal or diffusion, it's really helpful to understand that that has been mapped by guys like Nicholas Ostler. He says the most straightforward way in which a language can come to flourish could be called the farmer's approach. You know, and that's the approach that the ancient world had all over the place. All the community needs is to stay in one place and grow its population. This is organic growth, which is the typical story of large languages in Eastern and Southern Asia. Think of the Han Chinese particularly, and not unknown even in Europe, especially towards the east. That means the Eastern Europe. It is not a strategy of active initiative. You don't go and force your language down other people's throats. You just grow it through population. But it does raise a consequent question. How have languages that follow such a policy been able to defend themselves from foreign communities, which might be tempted to invade and disrupt their steady growth? This is what happened for the Mesopotamians. Mesopotamian language got gobbled up by the Akkadians from the north. The disruption would come by its nature from language communities following a less placid path. Violent invaders, they may be called the merger and acquisition languages. By analogy with the offensive players in the modern business world. So businesses will go and seek to merger and acquire. So he's using a business analogy for these languages. If organic growth is the strategy of farmers, the alternative would have to be called the hunter's way. The hunter goes out and captures languages. So there's the beautiful Mesopotamian script, the cuneiform, but Nicholas Ostler summarizes how languages come to dominate. There are multiple ways. Migration, the movement of people, so a lot of people come to New York. There's diffusion, languages are assimilated into other communities, picked up. Latin is a very good example of the way it diffused across, let's say, the European continent. Infiltration, he says, is a mixture of these two for previous processes, migration and diffusion. The Akkadians invaded Mesopotamia in the late 4th century, millennia, sorry, not century, the late 4th millennia. I'm going back 4,000 years, 4,500 years. No, it's the late 2nd millennia BCE, and totally absorbed the learning and the culture of the Mesopotamians, but they brought their own language, which they then took this script, this cuneiform script, and applied it to Akkadian language. So they didn't create a new script, they just reworked the script of cuneiform so that they could write down the great stories of the Mesopotamians and others, for instance, the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was first spoken and written down in Mesopotamian, but the most extant versions of that myth come in Akkadian, okay, which is interesting. So the dominance of Akkadian over Mesopotamian language is key. So we can see that language here helps us understand or see the workings of the course in ways that were previously perhaps not quite so clear for you. I hope that my thinking about language has helped you. And there is one last slide here. So there's Osler's book, Empires of the Word. You've got the book from Perlin above. And I've just discovered, and it's absolutely terrific, that there is a series on YouTube on the Empire of the Word, where Osler works, it takes us on a journey through time and language, and it's really beautifully done. So if you're interested, if you're curious and you want to know more, click on this. This will take you to the YouTube episode that I've just snipped here. So that is, as they say, that. And I'm going to pull back to this just for a moment, and I hope this has helped you. I've thoroughly enjoyed dipping my nose back into this stuff. I've said I'm a geek, I can't help it, and it's a really nice way to start thinking concretely. In a sense, this is what you need to do in task 2, except I'm asking you to use the Pecha process and to sort of disperse it through the thinking through a series of postcards, right? But anyway, we can come to that later. Right now, week 4, I hope this has given you something to think about and perhaps get geekish about. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.